The desert held its breath as the last train of the evening sighed into stillness. The station sat on the edge of nowhere, a single platform of warped wood, one bench and a rusted sign half swallowed by sand. A lone figure waited beneath the low-burned sky, her shawl drawn close against the wind's dry whisper. Her name was Ishta, and she had nowhere left to go. The people who passed through never spoke to her. Sometimes they looked, curious, judgmental, half afraid, but they did not stay long enough to see her eyes. She had learned that silence was safer than apology. When a man once asked her where she was bound, she told him, "I'm waiting for what doesn't come." The words tasted like ash, yet saying them was easier than explaining she had already lost everything a woman could lose without dying. That evening she was thinking of her father's voice, the last sound before gunfire, and of the way her mother's hands had smelled of cedar. The wind carried the ghost of that scent now, or maybe it was only her longing pretending to be memory. The world had been small once, a circle of songs and faces. Now it was a station. A plank bench. Thus, a shadow crossed her boots. He came without fanfare, a man in a weather-torn coat, hat brim shadowing his eyes. He moved like someone used to solitude. His boots made no hurry in the gravel. She didn't look up at first. Strangers had a way of turning cruel when she met their gaze. But he spoke low, as though not to startle her. "Mind if I sit?" She shifted just enough space for him on the bench. He sat down with the weary grace of a man who'd been walking since dawn. A canteen swung from his hand. He uncapped it, drank, and then, without looking at her, offered it forward. She hesitated. "It's clean," he said, his voice neither demanding nor kind, just steady. She took it. The water was warm but good, a small mercy. "Thank you," she murmured, and the words surprised her. She hadn't thanked anyone in months. "Wapi," he said after a pause, as though introducing himself to the air more than to her. "Ishta." He nodded, and that seemed enough for both of them. The wind pressed at their backs like an old, unseen friend. From the station door, Martha Jane peered out, wiping her hands on her apron. "That girl's been sitting there 3 days, she whispered to Sheriff Harlan, who leaned on the railing, chewing a toothpick. "Now she's got company." The sheriff squinted. "Company like that don't last. Folks'll start talking." Martha frowned. "Maybe folks should hush." But people in small towns don't hush, they hum with suspicion. Ishta felt it even here, a pulse beneath the boards. She knew how their eyes worked, seeing her skin before her face, her silence before her name. She rose from the bench, pulling her satchel close, meaning to leave before the gossip grew teeth. But the strap snapped, scattering its contents, an old comb, a few coins, a faded scrap of beadwork. Before she could bend, Wapi crouched and gathered the things quietly, one by one. His fingers lingered on the beadwork, turquoise, worn soft with age. "This means something?" "My mother made it." He said nothing, just pulled a piece of rawhide from his pocket and repaired the strap, his hands sure and careful. When he handed it back, she met his eyes fully for the first time. They were the color of creek stones, unpolished and steady. "Why help me?" she asked. He shrugged. "Because I could." Something in her chest shifted like thawed earth. That night the two of them camped near the tracks. He built a fire, small, respectful of the dry wind, and she sat across from him, her shawl wrapped around her knees. Neither spoke for a long while. The stars above them trembled with the kind of cold that carries sound too far. "Where were you headed?" he asked finally. She poked at the fire with a stick. "Anywhere that isn't here." He gave a quiet laugh, one that held more sadness than humor. "Then we're kin in direction." She looked at him, unsure whether he mocked her. But his expression stayed soft. The firelight made his face seem carved by time, not bitterness. "I lost my family," she said suddenly, "because I stayed when they told me to run." He nodded, as though he'd been expecting her confession all along. "I lost mine because I ran when I should have stayed." Silence swelled between them, heavy but not cruel. The wind lifted sparks upward, like prayers unsure where to land. She watched him tend the fire, patient as if caring for a child. In the glow, she saw the scar along his jaw, pale against sun-browned skin. He caught her looking but said nothing. In that stillness, something wordless passed between them, a recognition perhaps that sorrow doesn't need translation. At dawn, hooves scraped against gravel. Sheriff Harlan rode up, his badge glinting in the pale light. "Morning," he drawled, though his eyes were cold. "You planning to stay here, cowboy?" Wapi rose slowly. "For a while." "With her?" The sheriff spat near the fire pit. "This town don't need trouble." Wapi's voice didn't lift. "Didn't bring any." The sheriff tilted his head. You know what folks'll say. Folks'll always say. Ishta stood, pulse hammering. The sheriff's stare crawled over her like dust. She waited for Wapi to step away to let the man's authority settle. But instead he shifted, standing between her and that cold gaze. Kindness, he said evenly, don't ask permission. The sheriff's mouth tightened. He spat again, turned his horse and rode off, muttering something about fools and their ruin. When the dust settled, Ishta felt her knees weaken. Why did you stand for me? She whispered. Because no one stood for me. It was such a simple thing, said with the weight of an entire life. The days that followed were quiet. They stayed near the station, helping Martha Jane mend fences and repair shutters battered by wind. She paid them in food and the kind of company that came without questions. In those days, Ishta learned the language of Wapi's silence. How he always set a second plate before she asked, how he turned away when she braided her hair so she could have privacy, how he spoke to animals as if they were kin. Each small act was a kindness that required no declaration. Sometimes she caught herself humming while working and it startled her. It had been years since her voice had trusted the air. One evening, as the sky blushed itself toward night, they sat on the platform again. A train thundered by, its windows glinting like pieces of another world. When it was gone, the silence returned, richer somehow. Wapi reached into his pocket, pulled out a loop of twine and laid it in her palm. For you, he said. She looked at it, a ring crude but deliberate. What is it? Something that doesn't promise too much, he said. Just that I'll stay as long as you do. Her breath hitched. She wanted to ask if he meant it, but words felt clumsy around such stillness. The twine was rough against her fingers. She tied it around her wrist instead of her finger. Then stay, she said. A train whistle echoed from afar, long and lonely. Days later another train came. The conductor called her name. Someone had bought her a ticket long ago, maybe one of the charity men who thought kindness was best done at a distance. She stood before the open door, the scent of coal and iron in her lungs. Behind her Wapi waited, not pleading, not hopeful, just there. She looked at her reflection in the window, the same eyes but not the same woman. She had walked through loss, through shame, through silence. And somehow she had arrived at stillness. I'm tired of running, she said softly. He nodded and that was answer enough. They walked back down the platform, hand brushing hand, the twine bracelet catching the sun. Behind them, the train exhaled and departed without them. The sound faded into the open desert until it was nothing but wind again. A week later, Martha Jane braided wildflowers into Ishta's hair. There was no preacher, no music, only the two of them standing in the fading light. Wapi took her hand, his thumb tracing the edge of her wrist. Ishta, he said, and in that single word was every vow he'd never speak aloud. The air smelled of sage. Somewhere far off, thunder murmured, first rain in months. The drops fell gently, dotting her shawl, the earth drinking each one with gratitude. Years later the old station was gone. The wind carried only rumors of it, of a woman who'd waited and a man who'd stayed. People said they built a small home nearby, raised horses and never left. Sometimes travelers passed the place and found a carved sign nailed to a gatepost, kindness needs no witness. And somewhere in the telling Wapi's voice, older, steadier, would return to the story. She once told me no one marries a native woman, he'd say. But the world don't know what love looks like till it's seen her face in the firelight. The listener, whoever they were, would ask, what happened after? And he'd smile faintly, eyes gone to horizon. After? We stayed. That's all there ever was to do. The rest is dust, and dust remembers. The wind would rise, soft and endless, carrying the last embers of their story into the open, unjudging sky.